The desperate bargain. The twin moons of Vila cast silver shadows across the obsidian walls of the royal palace as Queen Mirel Cross stood on her balcony, gripping the railing until her knuckles paled. Below, her capital city of Norveth hummed with nervous energy. 3 days had passed since the Shadow Collective had stormed the Eastern Gardens and stolen away her greatest treasure, her daughter, Princess Lyra. Mirel's advisors filled her throne room with empty platitudes and battle strategies that would take weeks to execute. Weeks Lyra didn't have. The insurgents had sent their demands: abdicate the throne, or watch her bloodline end. Every royal guard had been deployed, every intelligence network activated, yet the kidnappers remained ghosts in the wind. The explosion that shook the northern courtyard came without warning. Mirel rushed through the palace corridors, her ceremonial robes flowing behind her like purple wings. When she reached the crash site, she found twisted metal scattered across her garden and a small vessel embedded in the fountain. Emergency crews were already pulling an unconscious figure from the wreckage. The stranger was human, unmistakably so, with his shorter stature and lighter build compared to her people. His flight jacket bore merchant insignia from the Terran Trade Coalition. As medical staff checked his vitals, his eyes fluttered open, revealing warm brown irises filled with confusion and pain. What happened?" he groaned, trying to sit up. "You crashed into my palace," Mirel said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of rule. "What's your name, human?" "Jack Torren. My nav system got fried by that ion storm. I just needed to land somewhere safe." He noticed the armed guards surrounding him. "This seems less than safe." Mirel studied him with calculating eyes. Something about his presence felt like the hand of fate. Her rational mind dismissed such notions, but desperate times called for desperate measures. This human was an outsider, unknown to the Shadow Collective, unbound by Vila's political web. "Jack Torren," she said slowly, "I am Queen Mirel Cross, and I have a proposition for you. My daughter has been kidnapped by insurgents who know every move my military makes. I need someone unexpected, someone they won't see coming." She stepped closer, her violet eyes boring into his. "Help me retrieve my daughter, and I will grant you whatever resources you need to repair your ship and return home. You'll have my eternal gratitude and the friendship of an entire world." Jack looked at the armed guards, then at the regal woman before him whose composed exterior couldn't quite hide the desperation in her eyes. He thought of his own family, lost years ago. "I'm a pilot, not a soldier," he said carefully. "I need a pilot," Mirel replied. "Someone clever and resourceful. Someone who can think like an outsider." She extended her hand. "Do we have an accord?" Jack hesitated only a moment before clasping her hand. Her grip was surprisingly warm. "We have an accord, Your Majesty. Then we leave within the hour." "And Jack?" Mirel's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Call me Mirel. If we're to save my daughter, we must trust each other completely." Through fire and trust. The crimson wasteland stretched endlessly before them, a sea of rust-colored sand punctuated by jagged rock formations that jutted toward the sky like broken teeth. Mirel piloted the small reconnaissance skimmer with practiced precision, while Jack monitored the tracking device they'd acquired from her intelligence network. The signal from Lyra's hidden locator beacon blinked steadily, leading them deeper into hostile territory. "The Shadow Collective chose their hiding place well," Mirel said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Few dare venture into these lands. The storms here can strip flesh from bone." As if summoned by her words, the sky began to darken with unnatural speed. Jack checked the atmospheric readings and felt his stomach drop. "We've got a massive pressure front moving in. We need shelter now." Mirel banked the skimmer toward a cluster of caves carved into a nearby cliff face. They barely made it inside before the storm hit with furious intensity. Wind screamed past the cave entrance, carrying sand that hissed against the rock like angry serpents. The temperature plummeted as the twin suns vanished behind the swirling chaos. Inside the cave, they set up a small thermal generator. The blue glow illuminated Mirel's face, highlighting features Jack was beginning to appreciate: the strong line of her jaw, the elegant curve of her neck, the way her silver hair seemed to shimmer even in dim light. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind, pilot?" Jack cleared his throat. I was just thinking how different you seem out here. Less like a queen, more like a person. Mirel settled onto the smooth cave floor, removing her outer cloak. Perhaps because out here, I can be just a mother searching for her child. Her voice carried a weight of vulnerability he hadn't heard before. In the palace, I must be stone. Unshakable. But Lyra. She paused, her composure cracking slightly. She's only 17 cycles old. She must be terrified. Jack moved closer, drawn by the raw emotion in her words. Tell me about her. A soft smile touched Mirel's lips. She has my stubbornness but her father's gentle heart. He died when she was young, a plague that swept through our world. I've raised her alone since then, trying to be both parents. She looked at Jack with glistening eyes. What if I've failed her? What if my enemies use her because I've made too many hard choices? Hey, Jack said gently, reaching out to touch her shoulder. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through him. You're doing everything you can. You didn't hesitate to come after her yourself. That's not failure, that's love. Mirel's hand covered his, and for a moment, the fierce queen disappeared entirely, leaving only a woman grateful for comfort. You've lost someone too. I can hear it in your voice when you speak of family. Jack nodded slowly. My wife and son. Pirates raided our colony 7 years ago. I was off-world on a supply run. By the time I got back. He didn't need to finish. Mirel understood loss intimately. They sat in silence as the storm raged outside, their hands still touching. The cave grew colder, and Jack noticed Mirel shivering despite her attempts to hide it. Without thinking, he moved closer, offering his warmth. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. This is highly improper, she murmured, but made no move to separate. I won't tell your royal court if you don't, Jack replied with a small smile. Mirel laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. When was the last time she'd laughed? You're quite unlike anyone I've ever met, Jack Torren. Is that good or bad? She lifted her head to look at him, their faces suddenly very close. I'm not certain yet. But her eyes said something different, something that made Jack's heart beat faster. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Mirel pulled back slightly, though her hand remained in his. We should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. They arranged their sleeping rolls near the thermal generator, close enough that Jack could hear Mirel's breathing slow as exhaustion finally claimed her. But before sleep took him, he felt her hand find his in the darkness and hold on tight, as though he were an anchor in the storm. Outside, the wind howled its fury, but inside the cave, something unexpected was beginning to bloom, a connection neither had anticipated, forged in shared pain and the desperate hope of saving one precious life. The rescue and revelation. Dawn broke over the wastelands in shades of amber and gold, the storm having passed during the night. Jack woke to find Mirel already awake, studying the tracking device with intense focus. The vulnerability of the previous night had been carefully tucked away, but when she glanced at him, there was a new warmth in her violet eyes. The signal is stronger, she said. We're close. Perhaps 3 hours by skimmer. They traveled in companionable silence, the landscape gradually shifting from barren desert to rocky highlands. The fortress appeared suddenly, a dark structure built into the mountainside, camouflaged against the stone. Jack counted at least a dozen guards patrolling the perimeter. Frontal assault is suicide, he observed. Mirel smiled grimly. Good thing we're not going through the front. She pointed to a narrow ravine that cut along the fortress's eastern wall. There. My father used to tell stories of these old strongholds. They all have maintenance tunnels for water drainage. If this one follows the same design. They abandoned the skimmer a kilometer away and approached on foot, using the terrain for cover. The ravine was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through, and Jack found himself pressed close behind Mirel as they navigated the tight passage. He tried not to notice how perfectly she fit against him, or how his pulse quickened at her nearness. The drainage tunnel entrance was exactly where Mirel predicted, sealed with an ancient grate that Jack managed to pry open with tools from his emergency kit. They crawled through darkness, following the faint beeping of Lyra's locator beacon. The tunnel opened into a storage cellar filled with supply crates and weapon racks. "Stay close," Mirel whispered, drawing a plasma blade from her belt. The weapon hummed to life, casting blue light across her determined face. "And Jack, thank you for believing in me." Before he could respond, she moved forward with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. Jack grabbed a stun rifle from the rack and followed, his merchant pilot instincts screaming that he was in over his head, but his heart refusing to leave her side. They encountered the first guard at the cellar stairs. Mirel disarmed him with 2 swift movements, and Jack stunned him before he could raise an alarm. They moved through the fortress like shadows, taking down guards efficiently and silently. Jack discovered he was a better shot than he'd given himself credit for. Fear and determination made excellent teachers. The tracking signal led them to a reinforced door on the 3rd level. Inside, they found Lyra, a young woman with her mother's regal bearing and her father's gentle eyes, bound to a chair but defiant. Her face lit up with shock and relief. "Mother!" "I'm here, Star Daughter," Mirel breathed, rushing forward to cut her bonds. "I'm here." The reunion was cut short by a slow clap from the doorway. A tall figure in dark armor stepped forward, Commander Vrex, leader of the Shadow Collective. How touching. The Queen herself, playing rescue hero with her pet human. "Let us pass, Vrex," Mirel demanded, positioning herself between her daughter and the commander. "I think not. You've just delivered yourself and your heir directly to me." Vrex activated a communication device. "All units converge." Jack's stun rifle fired, hitting the device and shattering it. "Run!" he shouted. Chaos erupted. Guards poured into the corridor as Mirel, Lyra, and Jack fought their way toward the maintenance tunnel. Plasma fire scorched the walls, and Jack felt a blast graze his shoulder, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Mirel fought like a tempest, protecting her daughter with deadly grace while Jack covered their retreat. They tumbled into the drainage tunnel just as explosive charges, set by Jack on their way in, detonated throughout the fortress's support structures. The building groaned and shuddered, ancient stone finally succumbing to modern firepower. They emerged from the ravine at a dead run, reaching the skimmer as the fortress began to collapse behind them. Vrex's voice carried across the distance, a promise of vengeance that Mirel ignored as she powered up the engines and rocketed them away from the destruction. Only when they were safely distant did they allow themselves to breathe. Lyra threw her arms around her mother, tears streaming down her face. "I knew you'd come. I knew it." Mirel held her daughter tight, her own tears falling freely now. Over Lyra's shoulder, she met Jack's eyes, and in that look was gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, something that made Jack's wounded shoulder and exhaustion feel insignificant. "Thank you," Mirel mouthed silently. Jack simply nodded, knowing that everything between them had changed in the span of one impossible rescue. Healing hearts. The mountain lodge sat nestled among towering pines, hidden from the world by ancient forest and winding trails that only Mirel knew. It had been her private retreat, a place where the weight of the crown could be temporarily set aside. Now it served as sanctuary for 3 exhausted souls who'd survived the impossible. Jack winced as Mirel cleaned the plasma burn on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. They sat in the main room while Lyra rested in one of the bedrooms, finally able to sleep without fear. The fireplace crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. "You should have told me you were injured," Mirel chided softly, applying medical gel to the wound. Her fingers lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Didn't seem important at the time," Jack replied, acutely aware of her proximity. "Getting your daughter to safety was all that mattered." Mirel's hands stilled. She moved to sit beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You risked your life for someone you'd never met, for a world that isn't your own. Why?" Jack turned to face her, finding those violet eyes searching his. "At first. Because you asked, and I'd made a promise. But somewhere along the way." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the bargain. It became about not letting you face this alone." "Jack," Mirel whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. The door to Lyra's room opened, and the princess emerged, wrapped in a warm robe. Despite her ordeal, there was a knowing smile on her young face as she observed her mother and the human sitting so close together. "I'm feeling much better, Mother. You don't need to worry so much." Mirel straightened slightly, her royal composure attempting to reassert itself. "You've been through trauma, Lyra. You should rest more." "What I've been through," Lyra said, settling into a chair across from them, "is being rescued by the two of you. I saw how you worked together, how you trusted each other." She looked directly at her mother. "I also saw how you looked at him when you thought no one was watching." Mirel's cheeks flushed with a color Jack hadn't seen before. She was actually blushing. "Lyra, that's hardly." "Mother, when was the last time you allowed yourself to feel something for someone?" Lyra interrupted gently. "Father has been gone for 10 years. You've been alone, carrying everything by yourself. But you don't have to be anymore." The princess stood and moved toward her room. "I'm going to rest now. Really rest. And I won't emerge until morning, no matter what I hear." She gave them both a meaningful look before closing her door. Silence settled between Jack and Mirel, heavy with possibility and unspoken emotions. Finally, Mirel spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's right, you know. I've been alone for so long, I forgot what it feels like to want someone beside me. Not as an advisor or a subject, but as—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Jack reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "As an equal? A partner?" "Yes," Mirel breathed. She turned fully toward him, vulnerability and strength warring in her expression. "But you're human, Jack. You have a life waiting for you among the stars. Your ship will be repaired soon, and you'll leave. How can I allow myself to feel what I'm feeling when I know you'll go?" Jack lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "What if I don't want to leave? What if, for the first time in 7 years, I've found a reason to stay somewhere?" Mirel's breath hitched. "You would give up your freedom, your travels, for a world you barely know." "I'd stay for a woman I'm beginning to know very well," Jack corrected gently. "A woman who's fierce and brave and beautiful, who loves her daughter more than power, who trusted a stranger when she had no reason to." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "I'd stay for you, Mirel. If you'll have me." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. A collision of loneliness ended, of walls crumbling, of two damaged hearts recognizing their reflection in each other. Mirel's hands tangled in Jack's hair as he pulled her closer, years of carefully maintained distance evaporating in the heat of their embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Mirel rested her forehead against his. "This is madness," she murmured, but her smile contradicted her words. "The best kind," Jack agreed, kissing her again, softer this time, savoring the moment. They moved to the fur rug before the fireplace, lying together in the warm glow. Mirel rested her head on Jack's chest, listening to his heartbeat, while his arms encircled her protectively. They talked in whispers about everything and nothing, his adventures among the stars, her struggles as a young queen, their losses, their hopes, their fears. "I never thought I'd feel this again," Mirel confessed, tracing patterns on his chest. "This certainty that someone sees me, truly sees me, not just the crown." Jack kissed the top of her head. "I see you, Mirel. Every magnificent part of you." As the fire burned low and the night deepened, their conversation gave way to tender touches and whispered promises. They explored this new territory between them with the same courage they'd shown facing the Shadow Collective, completely, fearlessly, together. When morning light finally crept through the windows, Jack and Mirel lay intertwined beneath a blanket, peaceful in a way neither had been for years. Whatever challenges awaited them in the world beyond this lodge, they would face them not as queen and stranger, but as partners bound by something stronger than duty or bargains. They had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and neither intended to let G. A new dawn. The return to the capital city of Norveth was nothing short of triumphant. Word had spread quickly of Princess Lyra's rescue, and the streets overflowed with celebrating citizens. Mirel piloted the skimmer through the main boulevard while crowds cheered and threw flowers, their joy palpable after days of uncertainty and fear. Jack sat beside her, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to suppress his smile when Lyra leaned forward from the back seat to squeeze his shoulder affectionately. "You'd better get used to this," the princess said with amusement. "You're a hero now." The palace courtyard was filled with officials, guards, and nobles all waiting to greet their returned queen and princess. As they disembarked, Mirel's advisors rushed forward with reports and concerns, but she held up a hand to silence them. "There will be time for business," she announced, her voice carrying the authority they all recognized. "First, there is someone who must be properly acknowledged." She turned to Jack, and the entire assembly fell silent, curious about this human who had accompanied their queen. "Jack Torren," Mirel declared formally, though her eyes held private warmth meant only for him, "you have rendered service to the throne of Vila beyond measure. You risked your life to save my daughter when you owed us nothing. You proved yourself brave, resourceful, and honorable. It is my decree that you be granted citizenship of Vila, full repair and upgrade of your vessel, and a permanent place of honor in this court." The crowd applauded, but Jack noticed the confused glances between nobles. They sensed there was more to this story, more to the connection between their queen and this outsider. Mirel wasn't finished. She stepped closer to Jack, her voice dropping slightly but still audible to those nearby. "More than that, I announce my intention to formally court Jack Torren, as is my right as a widowed monarch. He has proven himself worthy not just as a hero, but as a man of integrity and heart." The courtyard erupted in gasps and excited whispers. A queen courting a human? It was unprecedented, scandalous, thrilling. Lyra beamed with pride beside her mother, showing her full support for the declaration. Jack, for his part, felt his face flush, but he met Mirel's gaze steadily. "Your Majesty honors me beyond words," he said, loud enough for all to hear. Then, more quietly, just for her, "though I thought we agreed you'd call me by my name." Mirel's lips curved in a private smile. "In public, I must maintain some propriety, Jack. But in private." She let the promise hang between them. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Jack found himself overwhelmed by well-wishers, curious nobles, and a few skeptical military officers who tested him with pointed questions. Through it all, he remained aware of Mirel across the room, conducting her royal duties while stealing glances his way that made his heart race. Later, as the festivities wound down, Mirel found Jack on the same balcony where she'd stood just days ago, desperate and alone. Now, everything had changed. "Overwhelming?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "Completely," Jack admitted. "Are you sure about this, Mirel? Courting a human merchant pilot? Your nobles looked like they might stage a revolt." Mirel laughed, the sound free and genuine. "They'll adjust. And if they don't, they'll learn that their queen makes her own choices." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "Besides, I've faced down rebels and rescued my daughter with you at my side. A few stuffy nobles don't frighten me." "What about Vrex and the Shadow Collective?" Jack asked seriously. "He escaped. He'll come back." "Then we'll face him together," Mirel said firmly. "You, me, and whatever forces we can muster. I'm done facing threats alone." She leaned into him, and Jack wrapped his arms around her, marveling at how perfectly she fit there. Below them, the city lights sparkled like grounded stars. Jack thought about his ship, waiting in the repair docks, and realized he no longer felt the wanderlust that had defined his life for 7 years. Here, with this extraordinary woman and her remarkable daughter, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. A home, a family, a purpose beyond mere survival. 6 months later, the courtship had blossomed into something deeper. Jack had proven himself invaluable to Mirel's counsel, bringing perspectives and innovations from his travels that strengthened Vila's position among planetary systems. More importantly, he'd become a fixture in the royal family, a partner to Mirel and a father figure to Lyra, who'd taken to calling him Jack Father with obvious affection. On a cool evening, the three of them stood together on the balcony, watching twin moons rise over Norveth. Lyra had grown more confident since her ordeal, training with the Royal Guard and proving herself her mother's daughter in courage and determination. "I have reports of Vrex's movements," Lyra said, her tone serious. "He's rebuilding his forces in the outer territories." Then we'll be ready for him, Mirel replied calmly, her hand finding Jack's. Together. Jack squeezed her hand, looking at the two women who had become his entire world. Together, he echoed. The Shadow Collective remained a threat, and challenges would surely come. But as the three of them stood united under alien stars, they knew that whatever darkness approached, they would face it as a family, bound not by blood alone, but by choices made, dangers survived, and love discovered in the most unexpected places. The Queen had found her partner. The Princess had found her protector. And the wandering pilot had finally found his home among the stars, in the arms of a warrior queen who taught him that sometimes the greatest adventures don't come from exploring distant worlds, but from opening your heart to the possibility of love when you least expect it. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to face together, and that made all the difference. The end.